Tell me about the different papers in town.
The one thing I remember about the Herald was that they had a social column, and you could read about every little party that went on in town. If you had people into dinner, somebody would say,
that's
"Oh,
true.
did you get it in the Herald?" But they were much more political than what the Postal View is. Yeah.
I mean, the editorials every week were just, they caused a lot of firestorms. They were just, I mean, you never knew, certain editors more than the other. I didn't deal with anybody except, I think during my time was Paul Barger.
Paul Barger was the last, I think.
But
the last
I mean,
owner.
he would come to the council meeting and or be following a given issue, and those editorials were scathing sometimes against the city. I mean, it was a really difficult time.
What were their politics?
I don't know.
Well, to say they weren't fair and balanced.
Their politics were to be not fair and balanced?
Well, I don't know. You know, it just seemed that but they didn't always present both sides of the issue, probably.
It was sort of their opinion, and sometimes it was okay, and other times it was really difficult.
I guess if you own the paper, you feel like you can say what you want to say.
And then, of course, following his opinions on any given thing, depending on what they were, then the following week, the letters to the editor. I mean, it was just...
Well, did they print letters contrary to what they felt?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what was it like when the Coastal View came around?
Oh, it was a breath of fresh air. Because we all knew, I didn't know, like Michael Van Stry, and I didn't know Gary Dobbins, that I knew who he was, but we all knew Rosemary. And there was a comfortable feeling there that this was going to be different, because we knew her. We knew what kind of person she was, and it was true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not to say that they never printed something that maybe poked a little at the city, but they've really been non-political. They show both sides of everything. I think they're a really good newspaper, personally. I worked with them on legal ads all the time, and they were very, very easy to work with.
Well, and I think when there were the three of them starting it out, they were well known, and I think they were out in the community more, and so you became a little more adjusted to what their personalities were.
Well, I think their mission for the paper was so different. It wasn't to stir the pot. It was present the news, and I really felt that the Carpinteria Herald, maybe not always, I mean, historically it was owned by different people, but it was more about stir the pot,
And the Coastal View maybe is also more to feature what's going on in the community?
Yeah, they make an effort to show and talk about all the good things that are going on in the community and what people and groups are doing to improve the community or for each other.
Sports with both Kate School and the high school, and yeah.
How about Santa Claus moving out of the area? Do you remember when that happened?
I remember it, but
yeah.
I don't really have much.
Well, every time we go south, we go by and wave to Santa Claus.
Well, was that controversial at all, do you think, when Santa Claus was moved out of here?
Yeah, I think a little bit. With some real old diehards that remembered Santa Claus Lane from the early days, which we did.
Oh, yeah,
because,
the reindeer room.
Because the reindeer room, which was the primary dinner restaurant out there, was the place that lots of council members went after council meetings, and a lot of, I'm sure, hefty decisions were made out there. And we were used to the fact that maybe our Christmas party was there occasionally, and the little train and
Yeah.
all of that. We grew up with
Well,
that.
they had
you know.
Santa's Kitchen and the Reindeer Room. Apshargus had those two. And then, yeah, there were a lot of stories, old stories about going on
Reindeer Room,
from
yeah.
that area, yeah.
Well, like what type of thing?
Oh, just there was this, I don't know, just going way back. It was, the kitchen was owned by somebody else, wasn't it?
I
It was,
don't know.
was Haps, and then somebody else was in there. Yeah, I can't remember what that was.
I was,
But the Reindeer Room was a great spot. They had nice dinner and
Well, it had a bar and it was
Yeah.
a dinner restaurant, and we didn't have, other than the Palms, we had nothing like that. And it was out of the city. And so in the early days, even before me, I am sure, I could be wrong, but I would guess that during the incorporation battle, there were some important meetings that probably took place out there.
probably.
You know, about the pros and cons and all. But I never saw anything inappropriate. I don't mean that. It was just a place where people would go and after a meeting to hash out what
Well,
took place.
they had a piano player out there that was really good, and
at one point they had fresh crab out there, I think.
their food was really good.
One time I went with my young boys to the back of the building where they were packaging crabs and lobsters or something. And there was a man, a Spanish-speaking man, his English wasn't too good, and there were a lot of women working there. And we said, "What goes on here?" And he says, "I do 20 women here."
Oh, that's classic. Oh, my God.
But anyway, so Santa Claus was, where was Santa Claus moved to?
Oxnard?
Just on the other side of Oxnard, I think it is,
Near
yeah.
Camarillo?
Yeah.
We stopped once, because my son wanted
You can
to take...
see it from the freeway,
Yeah,
but I
you can
don't
see
know
it from the
which
freeway.
community it's
We
actually
stopped.
called.
It's kind of hard to get to, you know, I mean, you can see it from the freeway, but in order to get to, because Scott wanted to take a picture, we drove around trying to get to the right entrance into that street. But he
He
got
just
his picture.
sits there.
so,
I don't know
yeah.
what.
And he's all newly painted and looks good.
Now, one thing I know that you helped support from the beginning was touring with the candidates.
Oh, right.
Was,
So that was well, Larry, I remember when you first started at the city, that was when we started televising and taping the council meetings, and you had to work in this little closet in the women's restroom, and so you've come a long way since then. But one of the great things that you did was touring with the candidates. That was a great show, and I hope that's something that you continue doing. It's where you take them out and you let them decide where they're going to go. And so it's fun to watch because you see different sections of the town from different perspectives. So it's not only entertaining, but it's very educational as far as the community.
I think it's really,
Yeah, it's a great
really.
show.
I mean, you did it almost all the elections that I've handled, and a very, very important part of the campaign. It lets people see a whole another perspective of the person. Everything from their home to their interests to their political view. I think you do a great job.
It's
I'm not just
interesting
saying
to
that.
see how differently some of them pick out the issues that are important to them. You know, it's just, it
Yeah,
shows you
it
a
isn't
whole
always
new-
predictable
Uh-huh.
what you think they might talk about.
And I've even found some of the issues they think about me because when I toured with Manuel Valle
Oh.
and his wife, I put the wireless mic on Manuel Valle in the house, and I said, I'm going to go outside and walk up to the front door now. And when I went out in front of the house, I could hear in my headphones, he said to his wife, "Do you think he's Jewish?" She said, "I don't know. Do you think he's Jewish?"
Are you kidding? Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding.
Oh my God.
They weren't necessarily down on Jewish people, but it was just a funny thing.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Oh,
Oh, my
dear.
God.
That's good.
Well, that was,
On a different subject, home rent stabilization board. Do either of you know anything about that?
You probably got involved with that with city
What's
clerk.
the deal with that?
Well, the city, has had a mobile home rent stabilization ordinance in place for, gosh, as long as I know. And the idea of trying to stabilize the rents, space rents in the parks. The parks are inhabited by a good share of senior citizens on fixed incomes. At least historically they have been. And most of the parks historically have been owned by out-of-town owners who have no regard for some of the impacts on these folks. And we're raising rents at a ridiculous amount, and that's how come the city adopted the ordinance. But we went along, I don't know how long they went, it was okay. And then probably, I'm guessing it was in effect for maybe, you'd have to check, but 5 to 8 years from the time they adopted it.
And when was it adopted about, do you think?
That's what I don't know, I can't recall. But then the owners, there was a general movement around the state because many cities did what we did. It wasn't just us. Many cities adopted rent control ordinances for mobile homes, not rent control for other things, but for mobile homes. And then the owners started organizing amongst themselves that, they didn't particularly appreciate this because this was a cash cow that they had going. And excuse me, but I really think that's how they viewed it. Just keep jabbing those rents up and up and up. And suddenly they couldn't. They had to go to the city and go through a process. They had to put in a request to do a rent increase, and it was all based on cost of living. There's a whole criteria, which I won't go into. I kind of forget some of the details of it. So then they started, the next best thing is, okay, we'll sue the city, and we'll say that it's a taking of our property. It's a taking of such.
And what happened?
And we have been, the city has been through, as far as I know, at least 3 or 4 lawsuits. And up until I think the last one, we prevailed. Prevailed. But now, it's getting tougher. We had to do a mediation negotiation for how much that one of those rent increases was. What it comes down to is the best thing that can happen. We have 7 mobile home parks in Carpinteria. 2 of them are self-owned by the residents. Best possible scenario, because they control their own destiny. And Arbor Trailer Park and Silver Sands have both bought their parks. Sandpiper has tried, but they're bigger parks, so you have to get a certain percentage of people on board. It's not easy when you have so many people on fixed incomes. But overall, that's the best scenario.
And that's part of what's resulted from the lawsuits, that people try to buy their
Well, they see the advantage of doing so, but it really hasn't. The only park that's been able to is Silver Sands. The problem that as far as I know, that has happened is the park owners have figured out a lot of loopholes, and they're playing them for all they're worth to get certain spaces out of rent control. So in other words, a little elderly couple lives in a mobile home at a certain rent dictated by the city. And we have these schedules that we use. It's all very legal, very you can see where the computation comes from, cost of living, etc. And then the people pass on, which is very typical of what happens. And so then the owner, when he puts the space up the space becomes available, they jump the cost up, way up, and they kind of get around the ordinance sometimes, and it's a very tricky business. It's all very the legalities are really tough. The councils have chosen, through my time there, to support the ordinance, to try to protect all these people, to help them, because some of them have lived out there for years under rent control, and it's probably one of the bigger blocks of affordable housing. And if you let those go out of rent control, in other words, we could lose out. Rent control is being challenged at the state level, so it's not a done deal forever. But if it went away, we'd have people on the street. There's people that it's not a encouraging picture sometimes. Excuse me.
This might be the last question. Anything about the schools? Any changes in schools during the last 50 years, or controversies, or things added, or new programs that either of you are aware of?
Well, the one thing would be like the elementary schools, Catalino and Maine and Aliso. At one time we were first through sixth grade, and of course now we have middle school, and we no longer have the classes at Maine school. We just have Aliso and Catalino.
Okay.
And they're much more strict about living in the area of the school before you can go to that school. So. But I think they had it. They had middle school, and then they were going to drop it again, and then but it's still a 6th, 7th, 8th grade.
Anything else you'd like to say about the city of Carpinteria in the last 50 years, or the hopes for the future?
No, I think that we've covered quite a lot. Jayne is much more knowledgeable about some of those issues because she worked both in the planning department and for the city clerk, as the city clerk. And I was usually human resources, risk management, and worked more internally with employees, and I did do a lot of, part I enjoyed so much was I liked the PBIA. I liked, doing the parades and working with the community and working with the chamber. But overall, it for someone who went in just working temporary for a month or two, I lasted a long time. So
How many years?
36. Well, I started in 73, and I was part-time. And then I went to, school started, and Gladys talked me into working a few more hours while the boys were in school.
What was Gladys's last name?
Schilling, Gladys Schilling.
Schilling.
And so then I was working about 6, 7 hours thereabouts, and Gladys went to a meeting, and fortunately she detailed everything that she did. And she went to the meeting, she got sick at the meeting in San Francisco, came back, and she passed away within about 3 weeks. But she was calling me almost every day while she was in the hospital. And she had and I was doing the time deposits and doing payroll and doing a lot of the things. And I remember her saying to me, whatever you do, don't tell them you know how to close the books at the end of the month. Make him get the auditor to come in and do that. So that was very good advice. And so then I agreed with Alan Coates. I said, okay, well, I will stay on full-time until you find somebody to replace me. So in 2010, I thought, well, they're not going to find anybody to replace me. I guess I better retire. So retired the same time Jayne did.
Well, thanks for your good work, Pat. and you, Jayne, any last thoughts?
No, I loved my time at the city. I was amused to, at one point, be talking to my daughter. She just was appointed a city clerk.
Oh, she was. That's nice.
It's hilarious because she used to sort of berate me for the amount of time I spent on my job, night meetings for years and all. And to suddenly have, what goes around comes around. And in any event, no, I feel I was given so many opportunities there. I worked with such great people, so many interesting, fascinating council members. I can't even name them all because I really went through a lot. City managers, I would be lying if I didn't say, some better and easier than others, but I learned from all of them. I met so many people that are still my, best friends, and I really hope the city continues to preserve our community, keep it this wonderful place. I mean, we live in paradise, and drought and all, hey, it doesn't get much better than this. And I think that the city is doing a good job to try to do a whole lot with not a lot of money. And I think they've got some top-notch staff people right now.
Yeah, they
And
do. They have excellent
I miss
people.
certain people, especially. I mean, I miss them all, but some of them I didn't know as well, and there's a lot of new ones. But I think they have the best,
Yeah,
the
one thing
absolute
is
best city manager
Yeah.
around.
that Dave is a great.
He
very-
is absolutely.
One thing is that when Jayne and I were there, we had a really great staff, and we became really good friends and had a lot of fun, worked really hard, worked long hours a lot of time. And I think that we probably had two of the best jobs in town, to work locally and have a job like that you really enjoyed and really liked.
That's one of the big things that's changed, Larry, really, is a lot of us during all those years that we were there, we lived here. We lived here and worked there, worked here in town. We didn't commute. So I think it has to do with being invested in your community a lot more. I'm not saying that the employees aren't invested in their jobs now. It's just they come here from all over. Very few live here. And so their community is where they live. So they have a little different view of the city. It doesn't mean they don't do their jobs. They're very talented people out there. But for us, it was different because it was just the era that we were there. We went to the market here. We saw people at church. We saw people everywhere, because we lived here. It wasn't really planned that way. It just happened.
And
But I think it makes for a different,
It does.
a little different thinking, because I was waiting on people constantly at the city that I knew. I knew them. But like the current city clerk, she does what she's supposed to do and needs to do, but she doesn't know the people. She doesn't have to answer up down on the corner, and it makes for a different environment. I don't know if I'm making that clear.
Yeah,
I think when you live locally and you work locally,
We were lucky.
You don't represent the city just on the 8 hours you're in the office or however many hours it is. But when you're at the grocery store, people still think of you as a representative of the city.
Yeah.
I mean, there's good and bad to that.
Yeah, same with teachers at the high school have expressed that. Well, thank you so much, both of you ladies.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Excellent work. And so that was a good practice. Shall we start the real one?